Russian President Vladimir Putin's disdain for his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, is long-standing and it's well known. It runs so deep that he almost never utters the name Zelensky while referring to the Ukrainian president. The Kremlin insists that Zelensky is an illegitimate leader, elected illegitimately. Russian state television called Zelensky a clown. But US President Donald Trump has pinned his recent diplomacy on the idea that Putin and Zelensky will come face to face, and that's the only way to end Russia's war on Ukraine. Trump has said that he has begun the arrangements for a meeting between Trump and Zelensky when he spoke via telephone with President Putin on Monday after meeting Zelensky and a series of European leaders at the White House.
We're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
But the big question now in diplomatic circles is this: could the two central characters of this war, sworn enemies, sit down for a one-on-one? Is it possible at all? For Vladimir Putin, such a summit would be a way to cement a peace deal that the Kremlin would then cast as a victory in this war. But the Trump factor is also an important pressure point. Zelensky has to accept Putin's demands on Ukraine, whether it is land or sovereignty or guarantees that Ukraine will not join NATO. But such a meeting could also carry severe political risks because the Kremlin has been long signaling that negotiating directly with Zelensky would be beneath Putin, would be beneath the Russian leader. It would make him look like an equal, which is exactly what Putin does not want. It would be a compromise, and it would cast a potential Putin-Zelensky meeting as a concession in itself. And that is something that the Kremlin will be loath to.
Мы не отказываемся ни от каких форм работы, ни от двусторонних, ни от трехсторонних. Президент об этом неоднократно говорил. Главное, чтобы любые форматы 1+1, 1+2, многосторонние форматы, которых тоже немало, в том числе, кстати, и в рамках Организации Объединенных Наций, чтобы все эти форматы включались.
While Trump is extremely kicked about a possible meeting between Putin and Zelensky, the Kremlin, as always, has tried to keep its options open. Even after the Trump phone call to Putin on Monday, Moscow continued to insist later this week that a Putin-Zelensky meeting was possible, but they're not giving any kind of indication that it's going to be an imminent meeting. Signals from the White House, on the other hand, was that this meeting could happen as early as in the next couple of weeks. Analysts who study the Kremlin say it's hard to imagine Putin agreeing to a meeting with Zelensky unless it is clear to Putin that Zelensky was prepared to accede to all of Russia's key demands to end the war. And that includes Ukraine giving up both land and its NATO membership aspirations, both of which are non-negotiable to Moscow. Putin would meet with Zelensky only if it's clear to him that this meeting is needed for Ukraine to capitulate and for Zelensky to accept defeat. Or the other purpose would simply be to keep Trump happy and to keep the pressure from the White House away. To sit down with Zelensky for the purpose of a short meeting could also be potentially controversial in Russia. Putin has staked the entire narrative of his invasion on the false premise that Zelensky leads a regime which is guilty of genocide against Russian speakers in the east of Ukraine, particularly in the Donbass. That is not quite accurate. Putin has since spoken of Zelensky in almost venomous terms. In 2023, for example, Putin attacked Zelensky's Jewish identity. Putin said that his Jewish friends had told him that Zelensky is not Jewish and that he's a disgrace to the Jewish people. So a one-on-one negotiation could allow Putin and Zelensky to be seen as equals, and that is why Trump's insistence that a meeting between Zelensky and Putin is seen as near impossible as far as Moscow is concerned. Zelensky also, in his White House meeting with Trump, said that he was open to the idea of calling for elections in Ukraine once the war ends.
Are you open to holding an election in your country?
Yes, of course. We are open for election, yes. We have to do safety circumstances, and a little bit we need to work in the parliament, because during the war you can't have elections, but we can do security. We need, maybe, how to say, we need a truth, yes. everywhere, in the battlefield, in the sky, and the sea, to make possible for people to do democratic, open, legal elections.
Zelensky has been losing popularity over the last 3 years since this war began. It has drained the Ukrainian people of time, money, and most importantly, precious lives. When the war started, more than 90% of the population supported Zelensky. Today, that number is down to 70%. He also recently got a lot of flack for an anti-corruption bill which his government had stalled. Eventually, his government had to backtrack and give in because people started protesting against Zelensky. In fact, they said that this move was to try and hide the corruption that they allege him and his family had been indulging in since this war began. There have been serious allegations against Zelensky and his family that they pocketed millions out of the funds that came Ukraine's way after this war started. But currently, Ukraine cannot have elections because the constitution bars it to have elections because they're currently paused because of martial law. But if elections were to be held, then there could be potential challengers to Zelensky. One of them, and perhaps the leading contender, is Valery Zaluzhny. He's the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces. He currently serves as Ukraine's ambassador to the UK. He's known as Ukraine's Iron General. He enjoys high approval ratings. He's considered a serious contender. Then there is Petro Poroshenko, who's the former president of Ukraine and leader of the European Solidarity Party. He remains a vocal critic of Zelensky and has indicated his intention to run for president once this war ends. And finally, there is Yulia Tymoshenko, a former prime minister, who along with Petro Poroshenko leads the country's influential opposition figures. Current polls suggest that Zelensky would likely win an election if it is held during the war or right after the war. While his ratings are lower than what was at its peak during the war, they're still high, around 70-odd%, according to an approval poll by Ipsos, which was conducted in March of this year. Zelensky had said that he's open to holding an election in Ukraine under safe circumstances. He has specified that for a democratic, open and legal election to be possible, a truce would be needed on the battlefield, in the sky and in the sea. But a truce is not something that Trump wants. Trump instead wants a full-fledged peace agreement, which will be much harder to negotiate and will take longer to arrive at.
Been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.